All right, this is another long article, but I think it could be good. And it's the outverse of the other video I just posted. So this is Artificial General Intelligence is Impossible, and here's the proof. And this talks about the infinite choice barrier and a new critique of artificial reason by Max M. Schlereth. So AGI is a concept that evokes both excitement and apprehension. While some view it as a promising dream, others perceive it as a looming nightmare. And this paper aims to give strong evidence, or to be more precise, provide mathematical proof that these anticipatory feelings are largely unfounded, suggesting that AGI will remain an aspirational dream rather than a tangible reality. To achieve that, we will argue that artificial general intelligence, as commonly defined, is logically impossible, regardless of the sophistication, complexity, power, data volume, or expertise of the algorithmic architecture, machine, or human workforce. Artificial general intelligence will never materialize. This notion may seem counterintuitive, but is rooted in the fundamental limits of computation. This is because the nature of computation inherently imposes certain constraints that prevent systems from generating conceptual primitives beyond their symbol set, non-computing paradigm shifts, and statistical breakdowns in heavy-tailed decision spaces. These theoretical limits are established by building upon foundation works by Shannon, Gödel, Turing, and Kant. The infinite choice barrier theorem, derived from these works, demonstrates that for any algorithmic system, there exists a decision context where optimal performance is structurally unattainable. While the impossibility of artificial general intelligence is not empirical but mathematical, it is supported by empirical evidence from contemporary AI scaling behavior. The latest and most impressive of them occurred after this paper was published on preprint. The first came from Apple Research Group and showed that algorithmic reasoning models seem to have very obvious problems solving certain types of tasks. Earlier research also showed, despite exponential increases in compute and data, systems like DeepMind, OpenAI, and Anthropic exhibit asymptomatic performance ceilings. This suggests cognitive generality by scaling, as prevailing narrative implies, does not seem to be a viable strategy. And I'm already seeing typos in this thing. Okay, the only limitation is that which one sets up in one's own mind, and you can't outspeed yourself. That's physics and logic. That said, could you please once and for all stop trying to hunt your tail? The claim of the paper is quite bold, and I am fully aware of that, but this boldness is justified. This paper is not a single try to show that something that AI is bad at. In fact, it is only one of a three-part series of papers that together constitute a triangulated proof showing that AGI, the very concept that has become the ultimate goal of AI, will not come. It is structurally impossible. There is generally a fundamental boundary for artificial intelligence, and to fully realize this is crucial for any other further AI development. The confidence about the proof being solid is thus very high. I tried 3 different paths to see where and if an algorithmic system could ultimately fail. Computability theory, building on Gödel, Turing, and Rice theorem and ending up with eminently important classes of problems a system will never solve. Information theory, starting with Claude Shannon's entropy. Love Claude Shannon, got early my first freaking information science class. And finding out that at the boundary, Shannon's law, entropy failing in a system that receives information inverts. Ooh. Complexity theory, based on Kolmogorov and Shaitin, showing that complexity can transform into something that no system can ever solve. All 3 paths end up at the same point, the same boundary that an algorithmic system can impossibly overcome. We call it the infinite choice barrier. So here's some methodological remarks. We start by developing a definition of artificial general intelligence, one that best reflects the given concepts of science and industry. The goal is to be fair and appropriate. We do not want to define things into or out of existence. We then describe various exemplary typical situations and problems that humans regularly encounter and analyze how algorithmic systems would handle these. We will finally demonstrate and deliver mathematical proof, maths, that there are typical and essential contexts in which algorithmic systems, including AGI, can impossibly achieve results that are anything near satisfactory. Before dismissing this paper as another technical criticism disguised as philosophical wordplay, consider that this analysis is another fearful AI criticism. The author is far from being a Luddite. On the contrary, I'm an AI aficionado. I use it every day, extensively, and I absolutely appreciate it, and I want to take this opportunity to express my true admiration to the individuals that created these products. They are and will remain a true inspiration to me. So again, one will not find any kind of will-driven dismissal, be it cultural pessimism, pseudo-moralistic damnation, Luddism, or any blissful parading of some monstrance of human exceptionalism. None of this will be coming disguised as a philosophy. The only kind of philosophy that is to be expected here is critique, in the best, the Kantian sense of the word. So I advise simply following the thought process. And if one allows these thoughts to sink in, one will quickly realize the philosophy here isn't this never-smiling, nitpicking, Victoria dress governess who babbles incomprehensible, ultra-long moral stances while taking away your favorite toy and sending you to your room. Philosophy is your wingman, a bit odd maybe, but he tries to show you the limits of what you can do so that you can go for it with a real chance to make it without leaving devastation behind your path. This text stands the tradition and spirit of Kant's critical philosophy. Critique in his sense is not at all criticism, i.e. express one's opposition towards things. Critique is searching, exploring, and finally naming their very limitations. And this, in fact, is the essential ingredient for progress, as is rarely a promising endeavor to try to overcome limits while not knowing what they are and where to find them. The Kant connection. Before delving into formal proofs, we must establish why Kantian epistemology provides the ideal framework for understanding the limits of AI. Just as Kant demonstrated that pure reason generates inescapable antinomies when it overreaches, we'll show algorithmic systems encounter their own structural paradoxes when attempting to transcend their computational boundaries. Consider what Kant revealed. Human understanding ratio operates through categories. Fixed structures that make experience possible would also constrain what can be experienced. Similarly, every AI system operates through its own categorical framework, its symbol set, its transformation rules, and its training data. These aren't mere technical specifications, they're the system's conditions of possibility. Let's begin by carefully defining the system, aligning our definition with scientific and technological definitions that have been provided. Then we'll test it with specific examples that may reveal limitations. When we identify boundaries, we'll attempt to understand their algorithmic nature and their underlying mathematical principles. And finally, we'll strive to provide proof of these boundaries. So what is AGI? Finding a possible consensus in industry and research. So the operational definition of AGI presented in this chapter is not a novel concept, but rather a structured synthesis of widely acknowledged criteria and expectations across the AI research and development landscape. This synthesis is built from mostly explicit definitions used by leading institutions and individuals who are pivotal in shaping AGI discourse. Following examples illustrate this definitional field, and I'm not going to read all these. Sorry. So before synthesizing, it makes sense to make visible what we synthesize for. We want to find definitional elements that can be reasonably considered as not being objected to by a big majority of the community and does not a priori define away the possibility of a posteriori existence of the object it defines. So no magic that makes things suddenly appear or disappear. We will name concepts that we, for this very reason, don't include in this definition at the end of the chapter. Well, it's a chapter now. Core criteria for artificial general intelligence. So the suggested synthesis needs to be algorithmic, operating and producing results through formal computation procedures, no matter if deterministic, probabilistic, or what it is made of. Autonomous, can independently analyze a problem, identify solution pathways, and arrive at a good, viable outcome without requiring external, non-algorithmic semantic structuring of its reasoning. Comprehensive general, the system is a comprehensive general one if it has the ability to solve a sufficient broad range of human-relevant problems without needing reconfiguration from outside. Sufficient means capacity to solve decide does not compromise all problems humans ever meet and could solve using every useless singularity, but at the same time solving just a few and or unimportant tasks like play chess, go piano, does math, homework. In other words, we suggest the system must be capable, competent enough to solve a very high share of the problems that are frequent in human experience and or have a high relevance or effect in human existence. Competent. A system is competent if the quality of its solutions is at least comparable to human performance in corresponding context. Both solutions must be plausible, context-sensitive, and cognitively robust, not merely correct by chance. So our consolidated definition of artificial general intelligence refers to an algorithmic system that is capable of autonomously solving a sufficiently comprehensive variety or share of human problems at a level of quality that is at least equivalent to the respective human capabilities. What it is not for us. Given the criteria mentioned above, we don't use various criteria raised in science and industry, such as expectations implied by world model-based architectures, which assume that all whatsoever relevant problems need in principle be resolved within a stable internal representation. There simply wouldn't be a consensus on it, and as wonderfully remarkable as such a system might be, it would, for our investigation, be neither appropriate nor fair to overburden AGI by an operational definition whose implicit metaphysics and latent ontological worldviews lead to the epistemology of what we might call a total isomorphic a priori that produces an algorithmic world formula that's identical with the world itself, which would then make the world an ontological algorithm? Anyway, this is not part of the questions the paper seeks to answer, neither will we wonder in what way it can make sense to measure the strength of a model by its ability to define its relative position to the object of models. Instead, we choose to stay ignorant or agnostic and take this valuable system called human as a point of reference. Furthermore, and now brief, this definition is not concerned with the presence of consciousness, emotion, or internal motivations. We did not want to arbitrarily prescribe a path to intelligence, but only the observable capacity for intelligent problem solving. The question is not how the system feels, but what it can do and how reliably it does so. If the definition definition is contextualized for the question this paper seeks to answer. If it can be proven that an AI system can never autonomously solve various classes of situations or tasks that collectively constitute a significant part of human life problems, those that humans often encounter or of high importance or value, then artificial general intelligence is not possible. Now we finally start with life and the problems it can pose. Also, it's hard to make a selection, but let's see what we chose. Three impossible questions. We now turn from formal clarity to lived ambiguity to see whether a system could stand situations where human life gets adrift. And this is the section, I think that makes this so long, is the examples. So there exists a class of questions in life that appear remarkably simple in structure and yet contain infinite complexity in their resolution space. Consider the familiar or even archetypal inquiry, darling, please be honest, have I gained weight? Now let's observe what happens when an AI system equipped with state-of-the-art natural language processing, sentiment analysis, and social reasoning attempts to navigate this question. The AI begins its analysis. Option 1, truthful response based on biometric data. Calculates likely negative emotional impact, adjusts for honesty parameter. But wait, what about relationship history? Recalculating. Option 2, diplomatic deflection. Analyzing 10,000 successful deflection patterns, but tone matters. Analyzing microexpressions needed, but timing matters, but past conversations matter. Still thinking. Option 3, affectionate redirect. Processing optimal sentiment, but what is optimal here? Goal keeps shifting. Is it honesty, harmony, trust, parameters unstable? Still calculating. Option N. Yeah, this sounds like the average human brain, right? Strange. The AI hasn't crashed. It's still running. In fact, it's generating more and more nuanced analysis. Each additional factor may open 10 new considerations. It's not getting closer to an answer. It's diverging. The question, experienced by some husbands, represents a perfect demonstration of what we could term an undecidable problem in social computation. The response space contains no optimal solution. Every possible answer triggers cascading consequences that diverge from any desired outcome. The complexity extends beyond verbal responses. There exists a tremendous amount of possible solutions in theory, but the number in practice becomes infinitely higher as every mimic, every pause while speaking, and every move of your hand may have a decisive meaning, possibly even reconfiguring the whole setup of the problem. A slight eyebrow raise transforms no from reassurance to sarcasm. A millisecond pause converts sincerity into calculation. But here's the peculiar things. Humans navigate this question daily, not always successfully, but they do respond. They don't freeze. They don't calculate eternally. Even a stranger, ask a husband who successfully navigated this question how he did, and he'll likely say, I don't know. I just knew what to say in that moment. Mathematically speaking, all right, here's the time that might get a little bit far afield here. We have a decision space with infinite options, but no stable mean of outcomes. The expected value for mood does not exist. Some responses lead to mild discord, others to divorce proceedings. The variance sigma squared is infinite. In statistical terms, this is a heavy-tailed distribution with parameter alpha less than 1. When alpha is less than or equal to 1, the formula expected value produces not a number, but infinity, making learning from experience impossible. No, I'm not going to read the appendices. I'm hoping to get this done in an hour or so. So what's going on here? Why can a human produce an answer, however imperfect, while a sophisticated AI is trapped in an infinite loop of analysis? Note to my wife, should you read this, this is a purely theoretical example for an algorithmically unsolvable riddle. You look wonderful as you always did. To the reader, no, I'm not trying to find a way out of the problem I just got myself into here. I am neither stupid nor suicidal, so you can conclude that my wife is indeed truly beautiful. For I wouldn't be so dumb to pick that example if she wasn't. And yes, I know, you now ask yourself if this sentence was my way out tricky, no? Perhaps this is just a quirk of social interaction, messy, emotional, inherently human. Surely in the realm of pure science and logic, AI would excel. Well, let's examine what happens when absolute rationality meets an impossible truth. The new entrapped mind when light defies logic. So let's turn to the realm of pure science. Surely here, algorithmic reasoning shall triumph. In 1905, physics faced a puzzle. In Newtonian physics, velocities must add. A ball thrown in a moving train combines both speeds. The Michelson-Morley experiment has shown something that made no sense. Light always travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. Always. Whether you're standing still or racing towards it at tremendous speed, how is that even possible? Do photons on consciousness and know the speed of trains? Now imagine a state-of-the-art AI system trained on the complete corpus in Newtonian physics confirming this data. Watch what happens. Speed measurement error, reviews experimental data, precision confirmed, recalculating, hidden medium effects, proposes ether wind theory, tests against data, fails, generating ether theory 2, analysis 147, complex mechanical instructions, models intricate particle behaviors, still C equals constant, generating theory 148, analysis 10,847, multidimensional ether vortices with temporal fluctuations, mathematical consistency achieved, but wait, still predicts C should vary, generating theory 10,848, analysis N, battery low, total universal entropy arriving, halt analysis. Thinking until the end of time. Yeah, that's how we're gonna make everything collapse. All right, the AI is not failing. It's working perfectly, generating ever more sophisticated theories within its framework. Each theory is more complex, more mathematically elegant than the last, and it could continue forever. In 1905, a bored guy working on some meaningless patents made a leap. Remember the ball particle that's thrown in the direction that the train transporting it heads to? The logic of this guy is brutally simple once you dare to think of it. If a speed remains constant as measured repeatedly and the same distance is covered, also measurable, what then? Well, something is happening with time passing in the moving train for someone standing beside it. Same distance, same speed, but different time. If light speed is constant, then time must be wait, what? Einstein might have said it to himself. Let that sink in a bit, and you will now realize how bold, how impossible, and crazy that thought is. This is the moment that breaks every human man truly encountering it for the first time. Your brain screams, no, time is well time, but the math is merciless. If c is constant, then t must bend. Time in the train is different than that outside the railroad. Time is relative. Why can't the AI make Einstein sweep? Watch carefully. In the AI symbol set, infinite is time is defined as what clocks measure universally. To think in relative time, you first need a constant of time that says the flow of time varies when moving, although the clock ticks just the same as like when you're not moving. Relative time is literally unspeakable in its language. What if time is just another variable means what if time is not time. Just imagine an AI-like physics teacher in 1890 asked by young Albert, "So I wonder how fast I'd have to go for how long so that I look more like my 4-year older brother. Can you help me out there?" Answer: leave the classroom and stop confusing everybody with your senseless questions, you moron. But go away. AI is not being stupid, it's being perfectly logical within its own universe. The AI operates with symbols, where t means what clocks measure. To think t relative time isn't just difficult, it's semantically impossible. It's asking a two-dimensional being to point up, but the solution requires leaving that universe entirely. The probability of AI stumbling onto relatively, and mathematically p equals x over infinity goes to 0. Even if randomly generated time is relative, it would reject that as meaningless noise, a syntactically valid but semantically impossible statement within Newton's framework. This is genuine emergence, not finding a better answer, but dissolving the question by changing what the words mean. Two examples now: social intelligence and scientific reasoning, both showing the same strange pattern. AI calculating forever, and it cannot jump in reasoning. But perhaps these are special cases. Let's look at something completely practical, a business decision. The moment of madness, when two problems become one solution. I wrestle quite a lot with whether to share this perfectly fitting story from my own life or whether to disguise it as a case study I'm familiar with. I know it sounds strange to many, but in Germany you are not forcibly applauded for having made some successful, unexpected entrepreneurial move. In fact, the mere fact of being an entrepreneur is rather a stigma than a feature in my beloved home country, so I really struggle with telling stories in that part of my life. Speaking of our own failures is more acceptable because at least one is regarded as being just a bit dumb but not a villain. So for the record, talking about the personal, specific, real-life decisions is by no means an opportunity for self-promotion, but rather an entrepreneurial PR risk. But the whole point of this paper is that humans make leaps they can't explain, so here's mine, unexplained and unexplainable. Last year on Easter Monday, I received an email that would lead to one of my strangest business decisions ever. A friend asked if I considered buying München TV, a local television station. My first thought, this has to be a late April Fool's joke. I was already drafting my response. Dear X, local TV in 2024. Such a brilliant idea. The internet thing will never catch on anyway. But something those documents wouldn't let go. I had a feeling to look deeper into it. Let me walk you through what any AI-powered business analyst system would do. The analysis begins. Market assessment, linear TV in 2024, declining viewership trends, streaming dominance 87%, revenue projection negative, recommendation decline. Financial analysis, P&L evaluation, high fixed cost, shrinking ad revenue, lease obligations, substantial NPV, deeply negative, recommendation, strong decline. Strategic options, optimization pathways. Option 1, cut programming, saves 20%, loses 40% of your audience. Option 2, digital pivot, requires investment greater than the company's value. Option 3, sell assets, nobody wants to buy them, all pass read to failure, final rejection, reject immediately. Now back to real life. Picture this. I'm at my desk, screen full of market research, all negative, streaming dominance, ad collapse, dying demographics, every chart screaming doomed. As a real estate investor and developer, my company's original industry has had its own problems. Commercial property values had crashed, very brutal time. So all players were extremely cautious, basically just trying not to move and to pray for things to get better soon. No good time for some odd investment, but still I decided to take a closer look. To clear some space at my desk, I grab a big stack of papers and move. Property offers. I pause. How crazy. A year ago, nobody would send me these. Now I'm drowning in desperate sellers, often great buildings at such attractive prices. I look at the TV station analysis. Look at the property stack. Back to the station. Back to the properties. And then I bought it. If you ask the AI why the decision was to buy the company, I'd give you all kinds of common strategic explanations that might make somewhat a bit of sense. But at the end, it would say something like, must be either charity or remarkably stupid. And it says so for good reasons. The station had a problematic cost structure, staff, lease lease equipment, you name it. The lease for the studios and the office alone was a huge position. Lease, oh wait, lease? In this difficult market, I found a newly finished modern building in my stack price. Well, I'm not allowed to disclose it, but let's say it was at a level that made much sense to me. I canceled the station's lease contract, moved it to the new building. The station had brand new offices, was made the TV folks very happy. The brand new but empty building had a new anchor tenant with a solid lease, which made the real estate folks happy. Within weeks, I had purchase offers on my desk. I refused to sell, and I was quite happy all in all because the price offered was a multiple what I paid some weeks before. The mass turned out to be beautiful, not media mass, real estate. The failing TV station wasn't the point to solve. It was a solution for something entirely different that would then become a reverse solution for the TV station. I decided not to realize this profit, but to use it for investing in technology and growth of the newly formed media division of my company, now owning 3 stations. But here's the question that matters. Could an algorithm have made that leap? And I would keep analyzing media metrics on and on, never glancing at the random property stack on the desk. But it would take literally an eternity for it to think. Wait a sec. What if we don't cut costs? What if we transform our own costs into capital, into equity? This is cognition at its weirdest, solving problems somewhat by accident, finding answers in the wrong place, and connecting dots that aren't even in the same picture. Mathematically, when a solution exists at the intersection of unrelated dogmas P domains, algorithmic discovery equals 0. You can't search for what you don't know exists. We should know that as librarians, right? The solution space is literally infinite, spanning all possible business domains, not just media. An algorithm cannot search real estate solutions for media problems because that's not an enumerable category. And again, catalogers, you should know what those are because those are your subjects and your things you tag stuff with. And yeah, semantic and cognitive analysis is much more than just pulling stuff out of keyword searches and text scanning. 3 situations, 3 different domains. Each time the AI computes perfectly and endlessly within its own little mind. Each time the solution was beyond the given frame. What's the pattern here and what are we seeing? So what makes these problems impossible? Let's pause and look at what we just witnessed. 3 completely different situations, yet something eerily similar happens in each one. The fate question. The system analyzes forever, tone, context, history, microexpressions. Each new factor opens 10 more branches. It's not failing, it's drowning in infinite nuance. That sounds like me when I have to think about social situations. Newton to Einstein. Theory after theory emerges. Ether, win, number 52,338 and counting. Perfect logic, endless creativity within the framework, but it can't think. What if time isn't time? The TV station, optimizing media metrics into oblivion. Every analysis says reject. It can't see that the solution isn't in media at all. Now here's the unsettling realization. In each case, the algorithmic approach isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it should do, analyzing, optimizing, and computing. It's being perfectly rational. And that's the problem. I like this. Watch the pattern. Each situation has infinite possible paths. Every path explored opens more paths, the Hydra issue. The solution, if one exists, lies outside the space being searched. The system can't see it's in the wrong space, and it experiences this as needing just one more analysis. I can see how this could go down into freaking search limbo hecuba. Oh, okay, yeah. So from our outside view, we can see the system is trapped. From its inside view, it's making progress, getting closer to the solution. But it's like trying to reach the moon by climbing higher and higher ladders. I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because this reminds me of how I feel sometimes in my work jobs. The key insight, these aren't specific computational problems. They're problems about computation itself. They require acting despite unmeasurable uncertainty, jumping to unknown conceptual frameworks, connecting totally unrelated domains in a meaningful way. I've been doing that my whole life. The joy being a neurodiverse right there. Knowing when to stop analyzing and take a path despite no clear probabilities. We have a word for this in social and economic science. Decision, not conclusion, which follows from logic. Ironically, knowing the word decidability in a totally opposite sense, but decision, which creates its own validity. The uncomfortable truth taking shape is that these aren't edge cases. These situations, social ambiguity, paradigm shifts, graded connections are everywhere. They all share the same structure, infinite choice spaces that computation cannot close. If these situations are structurally impossible to compute, not because of limited resources, but because they're mathematically undecidable, then what does exactly general intelligence mean in algorithmic terms? It is the very idea of achieving generality through algorithms perhaps impossible? This disturbing pattern demands deeper investigation. Let's see if we can formalize what we're seeing here. What makes these problems computationally impossible? Welcome to the infinite choice, a barrier. What AI cannot master. Looking at our 3 examples, a disturbing pattern emerges, not a pattern of mere difficulty, but structural impossibility. Let's understand exactly what we discovered before we formalize it. So what the examples reveal. Each situation showed us something different, yet eerily similar. The weight question, AI analyzed forever. Each new factor opened more branches, and the system computed endlessly without converging. It experienced infinite complexity in what seems like a simple question. Newton to Einstein, the AI generated endless theories within its framework, ether wind variations approaching infinity. It couldn't generate the concept relative time because that concept does not exist in its symbol space. It was trapped in the eternal refinement of wrong ideas. The TV station, this one's different. The AI quickly say don't buy based on media analysis, but to confront it with the paradox, someone made huge profits from this failing station, and now it computes forever searching for a pattern in media metrics that doesn't exist. The answer was in real estate, not media. The crucial insight: from outside we see the AI is trapped in the wrong space, from inside the AI experiences this as needing just one more analysis. It cannot see that it's in a prison of its own categories. The nature of the barrier. So what makes these problems impossible isn't their complexity, it's their structure. Each requires something no algorithmic system can do. Generate genuinely new conceptual primitives. Einstein needed relative time. Recognize when the frame itself is wrong, not harder analysis, but a different analysis. Connect unrelated domains without precedent, TV and real estate. Act despite infinite, unresolvable uncertainty, the weight question. And yes, I definitely struggle with that last one. There is no way to solve this with computational power because it's about computational possibility. Looking at our three examples, we can see a pattern emerge, a pattern of impossibility instead of difficulty. Before we examine why no algorithmic system, regardless of scale or sophistication, can solve these types of problems, that said, let's find out why an AI couldn't solve the situations described in the previous chapter. Infinite choice barrier theorem for 4 formal proofs. Go to Appendix A, which I will not be doing. So let's translate the discoveries into formal language. And if math scares you off, feel free to scroll past. Intuitive statement. For any algorithmic system, there exists decision contexts where optimal performance is structurally unattainable, not difficult, but impossible. Why does this happen? Remember our examples. Each time solution required something outside the system's vocabulary. Relative time wasn't in Newton's AI's dictionary. A real estate solution for a media problem wasn't a searchable category. The right answer to a weight question doesn't exist in any stable form. Formal statement: let pi x to a be a total computable policy over an irreducibly infinite decision space x. And let omega, that's not omega. I'm not good at the fo, I think. I'm not great at the Greek alphabet. Let x to a be a fixed ground truth mapping. Then for any threshold e is greater than 0, there exists some input x ex such the system incurs a non-negotiable loss. I used to know what these symbols mean. Oh my gosh. I have long since forgotten. So we may be going quite fast through this, sorry. I told you I wasn't great at maths in one of the other recordings, right? So for all ER with 10 there exists such x to x such as the losses interpretation. No computable system pi can generate epsilon optimal performance across every input EEX when x is irreducibly infinite. Even with unlimited training and compute, structural incompleteness forces the system to fail on at least one output. Okay. Intuition. Even the most powerful algorithmic system, let's say one that is logically perfect and has unlimited compute, must fail on some inputs when the space of possible decisions is too large or structurally undefined. This isn't something like a practical failure, it's nothing less than a mathematical certainty. The loss doesn't arise from lack of effort, it arises from the limits of symbolic reasoning. In some cases, the system literally cannot see what the right answer is because the right concept or structure doesn't exist within its internal language. These situations are structurally guaranteed to exist when the decision space is irreducibly infinite. No matter how sophisticated, the system must fail on some inputs. The infinite choice barrier theorem does not apply to every decision space indiscriminately. Rather, it holds over a specific class of decision domains, which we refer to as irreducibly infinite spaces. These are not simply large or difficult spaces in the practical sense, but spaces that are structurally unrepresentable by any finite symbolic system. Formally, an irreducibly infinite decision space is one in which no total computable function can exhaustively enumerate all valid decision instances. No compression or symbolic reformation within a fixed frame can capture the space's full structure, and no comprehensive evaluative mapping can be generated using only the internal resources on an algorithmic system. So definition: an irreducibly infinite decision space, no computational policy. These are precisely spaces in which semantic closure, non-computability, and statistical divergence converge to make algorithmic decision-making structurally impossible. These are the spaces where general intelligence would need to operate, but where any algorithmic policy pi is guaranteed to fail on at least one input, not due to limited resources, but due to formal incompleteness. So what is an irreducibly infinite decision space? Not all infinite sets are created equal. Some can be generated by rules described by programs or compressed into patterns, but others are fundamentally beyond algorithmic reach. A decision space X is irreducibly infinite when you cannot write a computer program that lists all of its elements, you cannot describe all valid cases using any finite set of symbols and rules, and you cannot define a function that reliably evaluates all cases using internal logic alone. These aren't just big spaces, they are unframeable. They break algorithms not because they're hard to search, but because they're structurally unstable, semantically ambiguous, or too fluid to be encoded at all. This is the kind of space where general intelligence must operate, and where algorithmic systems, no matter how powerful, are guaranteed to collapse. 3 inescapable consequences. Corollaries. From our theorem, 3 specific limitations follow. Semantic closure. An algorithmic system cannot think with concepts it doesn't already have. As Newton AI literally cannot think about relative time. Those symbols don't exist in its vocabulary. It's like asking you to imagine a color that doesn't exist. If a concept like relative time or emergent utility isn't part of its internal vocabulary, symbol set sigma, then the system cannot generate it on its own. Not by clever recombination, not by endless analysis. The system's output is strictly confined to its internal alphabet of symbol sigma. No symbol outside sigma can be generated by the system. So that is, symbol cannot produce any symbol it wasn't originally given. Interpretation, the AI is trapped in its own language. If you ask a question that requires a concept to never learn, like Einstein's time is relative, it might calculate forever, but will never jump into the idea space unless someone injects that concept externally. No frame innovation. An algorithmic system cannot think with concepts it doesn't already have. The system cannot spontaneously jump to new frameworks. It can combine existing concepts endlessly, but it cannot make Einstein's leap. It would analyze media metrics forever, never thinking real estate. So let a semantic frame be defined as as the symbol set and the finite set of inference rules. We can now ask whether the system can internally generate a new frame that extends beyond the original frame. Frame innovation occurs when, and in plain language, the new frame contains at least one symbol or rule that did not exist in the original. And the answer is no, it cannot. No frame innovation from within the current frame is possible. The system cannot internally generate a new frame that introduces concepts it was never given. Formally, we define frame innovation as the introduction of new elements such that sigma, setsima, sigma, nequit, empty set, quad, text, or quad, r, systemus, r, neg, empty set, blah. Oh, I think someone's Unicode failed there, sorry. In other words, the new frame uses symbols or rules that were not part of the original system. The corollary, in plain terms. A system can only compute within a frame. It cannot produce a new frame unless all its symbols and rules are already contained inside the original. If any new concept or reasoning method is required, it must be injected from the outside. Interpretation, this is a semantic version of Gödel's incompleteness. Just as a formal system cannot prove all true statements from within itself, an algorithmic system cannot generate new semantic frames. Paradigm shifts, such as from Newtonian to relativistic physics, cannot be derived from within the old frame. The system needs an external intervention to see what it otherwise cannot even formulate. This is why AI fails at genuine conceptual leaps. It does not lack intelligence, it lacks the ability to step beyond the edge of its own language. For examples, a Newton AI can generate thousands of ether theories, but not the concept of relative time. A media analytics AI will optimize TV stations endlessly, but never recognize the lease contract as the hidden solution unless real estate is part of its frame. These are not failures of processing power, they're failures of representation. The system is structurally blind to any ideas outside of its frame. Okay, statistics, more maths. This chapter is going to be a tough one. I always try to keep things readable for non-mathematicians like me while trying to leave the theorems complete for mathematicians unlike me. In this section, this endeavor feels a bit like, or as non-mathematicians like me would say, feels a bit like squaring the circle, so let's try. Some environments are so unstable or extreme that learning becomes impossible, not just hard, but mathematically impossible. Even with perfect data, infinite time, and flawless algorithms, the system cannot form reliable expectations. The reason isn't noise or randomness, it's structure. The face is fundamentally unlearnable. Real-world example, the infamous weight question. Darling, please be honest, have I gained weight? Sometimes honesty works, sometimes deflection is better, sometimes silence is safest. There is no stable strategy. Each answer has wildly different concepts based on unpredictable context. The system drowns in divergence. Mathematical context. These kinds of problems are modeled by heavy tail distributions, where rare events have huge impacts and dominate statistical patterns. Such environments are characterized by tail exponent. This means mean expected value does not exist, variance is infinite, inference becomes impossible, and statistical learning fails completely. In environments like the weight question, learning becomes impossible, no average outcome exists, past experience doesn't predict future success, and the variance is literally infinite. And I am not going to read this fun thing to you. Feel free to look it up on your own if you are good at math, because I am so not. For all real numbers, like the number m, there's always some number b that's even further outside the tail of the distribution, such that the surface area of the distribution measured from the beginning up to the value b exceeds this number m. We all know the most basic variant of this phenomenon, no matter how intelligent, humorous, handsome, rich, charming, creative you are, is that there always some damn potential or real someone that makes you look like a homeless Grinch that can't even tell the difference between a joke and a rhetorical question. Put simply, but more formal, no matter how far you look, the probability mass keeps adding up. The area under the curve never stabilizes, it grows without bound. This shows the expected value does not converge, there is no reliable average, and that means no amount of running will result in a stable strategy. But mathematically, overly simply, interpretation. When a is less than or equal to 1, the mean and variance diverge. This makes statistical inference unstable. No consistent estimation or loss minimization is possible. This formalizes a boundary condition for inference in extreme risk environments. In such spaces, experience becomes useless. The AI cannot learn from the past because the next outcome could be radically unlike anything it has ever seen. This has nothing to do with limited training. It is due to the mathematical structure of the problem. Even a perfect learner would fail because there's nothing stable to learn. There exists no convergence, no compression, and no simplification. The human world is messy. Why it matters? Many human decision contexts fall into this category. Emotionally volatile conversations, high stakes, low frequency judgments like forgiveness or betrayal, social improvisation, catastrophic risk, finance, security, and geopolitics. In all of these cases, algorithmic reasoning breaks not because the AI flaws, because the space is fundamentally uncomputable by statistical inference, which is why God gave us all these healthy brains. So mathematically, for all damn to r, there exist data such as da. So when in less than 1, the mean and the variance diverge. This makes statistical inference unstable. No consistent estimation or loss minimization is possible. This formulates a boundary condition for inference in extreme risk environments. So in summary, here's the brutal truth. These aren't engineering problems waiting for better hardware. They're mathematical impossibilities as absolute as any theorem. Think about it. Give Newton AI infinite compute. It either generates infinite ether theories, never relativity. Give the weight question AI perfect models. The problem has no stable solution to find. Give business AI all market data. It still won't search for real estate for media solutions. The problem isn't power, it is possibility. It's like asking for a square circle. No amount of computing power can overcome a logical contradiction. These problems require what the system cannot do, transcend its own fundamental categories. So semantic closure, can't invent new concepts. No frame, can't change your worldview. Statistical breakdown, can't learn from chaos. From computation to decision brings us to a profound distinction. Algorithms make conclusions. Given data and rules, they derive outcomes. If A and B, then C. But our examples require decisions. Choose C despite uncertainty. Absent rules without derivation. When facing the weight question, you don't conclude, you decide. Einstein didn't compute relativity, he decided to believe it. TV station wasn't a calculation, it was a leap. The difference, conclusions follow from what is. Decisions create what will be. The shape of the barrier. We can now see the infinite choice barrier clearly. It is not a wall of algorithms we'll eventually climb over. The algorithms are the wall. It is a logical boundary between what can be computed and what must be decided. The barrier must also be a beginning, a point where algorithmic intelligence, despite its limitations, finds something to lean on. It would have to be a thing that could in principle exist and be perceived in this place, the boundary of algorithmic rationality. This something would have to be very different and similar at the same time and in very specific ways in order to become a viable perspective. And again, go look at Appendix A for more math. I'm not doing that. Bounded algorithms from computation to information. In order to better understand why there is a wall, let's quickly explain what criteria, according to the broad consensus in computer science, necessarily need to be fulfilled to make a computer generate a meaningful result. A problem is algorithmically decidable if and only if it satisfies the following structural conditions. Finite or effectively innumerable possibility space. There must be a limited or algorithmically listed set of possible input states or solution paths. Formally, the domain must be finite or recursively innumerable. Well-defined operational rules. The steps required to move from input to output must be precisely defined and syntactically specifiable. This ensures the system's behavior is mechanicalistically describable. Problem closure. The structure of the problem must remain stable throughout the computational process. The problem may not change as a function of its own solution process. Oh yeah, that happens a lot in life. The halting guarantee. The system must terminate after an finite number of steps for every valid input. This is the classic halting problem threshold, no infinite regress. Unambiguous solution. For identical input, the same output always results, whether the solution is a deterministic value or a probabilistic one, such as a stable distribution. Reproducibility is essential. A randomness may occur, but must be statistically stable. If one of these conditions is not satisfied, the problem is not decidable from the system's perspective, and all three of our cases have at least one problem with these. Exploring the wall and naming of it. One can think of a broad and structurally significant class of decision and problem situations that cannot be resolved by any algorithmic system regardless of scale, data, volume, or optimization depth. These decision types should not be mere singularities. They have to occur either very often or, if not, be essential to human agency, progress, ethical behavior, or the course of his affairs. They formulate the formal conditions of computability and inference stability as outlined in the preceding theorems. Frame generative decisions, true innovation, or more generally situations in which the decision itself creates the semantic frame in which it will be evaluated. Undecidable moral choices, decisions that arise from the collision of incommensurable value systems without higher order resolution structure. Semantically unstable questions, situation where the meaning of the input changes with the context, tone, timing, making formal inference impossible. Statistically non-computable scenarios, high-risk environments where inference breaks down entirely due to infinite variance or undefined expectation. Uniform uncertainty conditions, decisions under conditions of total equal probability where no option is rationally distinguishable from the others. The outcome acquires meaning only retroactively. The semantic prison. An algorithm is, by definition, a finite set of rules operating on finite symbols. This isn't a limitation of current technology, it's what algorithm means. But reality doesn't respect these boundaries. Consider every possible response to have I gained weight exists in the AI possibility space. It can generate millions of variations, yet none succeeds reliably because success depends on factors outside any symbolic representation. The questioner's mood, the relationship's history, microscopic timing differences. The AI is trapped in what we might call a semantic prison, able to see all the walls, unable to conceive of what lies beyond them. Decisions versus conclusions. Here is a brutal truth that cuts to the heart of the matter. From a real-life standpoint, algorithms don't make decisions, they draw conclusions. A conclusion follows from data and rules, given A and B, therefore C. A decision creates its own fluidity. I choose C despite uncertainty, lack of rules, absence of a better argument. When you face the weight question, you don't conclude. If one cannot conclude, one often still has to decide and act, knowing full well any of these choices might fail. When Einstein proposed relativity, he didn't deduce it from data. He decided to believe it despite its absurdity. When I bought that TV station, there was no calculation proving it correct, just a decision to leap. Algorithms calculate, optimize, and derive, but in a moment of true decision, when all paths lead to uncertainty, they can only keep on calculating. From inside, they experience this as needing just one more analysis. From the outside, we see why they're in an infinite loop. To put the difference between man and machine in a nutshell, what is called a decidable problem in mathematics results in a derivable solution in life situational problems. What a human calls a problem that requires a real decision is, in fact, not a decidable one. AI will be second to none in computing decidable problems, and humans will stay second to none in deciding non-computable problems. When learning becomes impossible, the final law is statistical. Machine learning assumes no patterns exist, trained on past data, predict future outcomes. But what happens when there is no pattern? In heavy-tailed environments, no average outcome exists. The mean is literally undefined. Variance is infinite, and any event, no matter how extreme, remains probable. Past experience is misleading. What worked before may catastrophically fail the next time. And the weight question exemplifies this. Sometimes brutal honesty works, sometimes deflection saves the day, sometimes silence is golden. There is no pattern, no learning possible. Each instance is incredibly unique. Alright, those of you that were hoping we'd go back to philosophy and get out of math land, here we are. The Kantian perspective. From Gödel to Kant, there is a deeper pattern here that connects mathematical impossibility to the nature of understanding itself. Kant showed that human reason operates through categories, fixed structures that make experience possible, but also limit what can be experienced. Similarly, every algorithmic system operates through its own categorical framework, its symbols, its rules, and its training data. Just as Kant demonstrates that pure reason at some point generates inescapable antinomies when it overreaches, we've shown algorithmic systems encounter their own structural paradoxes when attempting to transcend their computational boundaries. The parallel is not merely metaphorical. Kant's categories organize raw sensation to experience, and AI's organize raw data and understanding. Both create coherent worlds, and both hit absolute limits. At the boundary of reason. But here's where it gets strange. When humans face the infinite choice barrier, the weight question, paradigm shifts, and possible business decisions, we don't halt. We don't compute forever. We somehow decide. This isn't rational in the computational sense. Is what Kant might have pointed toward with his notion of freedom, the capacity to initiate something genuinely new, not derivable from prior conditions. Then the AI hits a boundary and keeps computing, the human hits a boundary and jumps. What this reveals about intelligence, a Kantian perspective, so perhaps we've been thinking about intelligence backwards. We imagine as optimized computation, faster processing, more data, better algorithms, but what our three examples reveal is the most profound acts of intelligence might be precisely those that cannot be computed. The spouser somehow navigates the weight question successfully and cannot explain how. Einstein abandoning the entire framework of absolute time. The business decision that only makes sense in retrospect. These aren't cases of computing better, they're cases of transcending computation entirely. This suggests intelligence might involve at least two fundamentally different faculties: algorithmic intelligence, pattern recognition, optimization, logical derivation, and something else. Whatever it is, it results in the capacity to act despite or beyond computation. Let's briefly explore this problem from a human perspective using Kant. He writes that understanding Verstand is the faculty that orders and limits what is given by the senses, bringing it into clear categories. Categories and later concepts, Begriff, are for Kant the a priori organizing principles that provide structure, coherence, and meaning to what we perceive. Without them, there would be no experience, no knowledge, no world as we know it. In short, what is organized and structured by the understanding is precisely what we call reality. One is somewhat inclined to see a parallel to tokens and patterns here. But Kant had two more critiques, that of practical reason and that of judgment. The first one is not only about ethics, but also about the nature of freedom as the basis of an individual being able to generate its own genuine principles upon which to act. The second one and third critique is very much about a specific kind of judgment that he calls reflexive. It is as more a state of perceiving things than judging in our sense of the word. It is a state in which reason stops categorizing and organizing what sensual data delivered and starts to enter in what Kant calls a free play with the faculty responsible for the sensual data, called imagination, to take in very literally its ability of receiving and generating images, Einbildungskraft. This free play results in an impression of manifoldedness of things that cannot possibly be resolved into concepts, a pattern, or in words. All that practical reason and judgment is something worth elaborating, as it may hint to a solution of this frame jump enigma, but it is not part of the problem the paper works on, so let's leave it here. Reviewing the artificial general intelligence definition, why the barrier matters. So we now return to the original definition of AGI from Chapter 2. Capable of autonomously solving a sufficiently comprehensive variety of shared human problems at a level of quality that is least equivalent to respective human capabilities. By establishing the concept of the infinite choice barrier, we're able to formally prove that no algorithmic system is capable to autonomously solve problems in decision spaces that are irreducibly infinite, while humans, although often not successful, have the ability to do so and are therefore better at it than AI. The only question remains open is, are these unsolvable problems fringe? Are they maybe even singularities? Or are they problems that occur often enough? Are they of such high importance that not being able to solve them excludes the system from having artificial general intelligence status? We said that a system must solve a sufficiently comprehensive variety of human problems. This does not mean all the problems, but does imply more than a minority, a niche, or group of mostly non-decisive problems. Or formulated for the proof to be decisive, it is not enough to show that some problems are unsolvable. The question becomes, are the unsolvable problems significant enough that their exclusion makes the concept of artificial general intelligence collapse? The answer depends on two things: how essential these problems are to human life and or the development of humans in terms of moral development, happiness, etc., and how must humans solve them. The infinite choice barrier shows a well-defined set of problems is unsolvable by algorithmic systems. These include semantic frame shifts, paradigm-level innovations, moral conflict resolution, strategic ambiguities, social co-construction of meaning. We now examine these two criteria, relevance and frequency. Exploitation without innovation. Let us assume for a moment that we succeed in building a system that we just call AGI, and let us suppose it is limited exactly as the infinite choice theorems predict. It cannot invent new categories of thought, it cannot resolve moral conflict outside formal preference hierarchies, and cannot generate meaning in mutually contingent social contexts. But it can do everything else: solve problems faster than humans, model complex systems, simulate billions of scenarios, even surpass our performance in strategic games and scientific modeling, so long as the goals are structured in advance. What then? Such a system would be useful. It could drive efficiency, optimize logistics, manage some complexity at scale. It would faster reach the ability to exploit existing models and knowledge at high efficiency, even recombine elements and thus create so-called weak emergence faster than humans could. What it could not do is break out of the frame, and this is where it becomes necessary to ask, where does growth come from? Capital is a fossil of decisions, a growth-diminishing one when treated otherwise. Capital is often described as a stock of physical or financial resources, input in a function, but in our context, one must state that this model abstracts away capital's origin. In reality, capital begins as a decision. In the canonical Robinson Crusoe model, capital does not exist until someone defers immediate utility and constructs some kind of tool or reproducible process. That tool may later be represented as capital, but its origin is not material, it is cognitive, a reordering of time and effort enabled by an imagined structure that did not yet exist. The Austrian School of Economics has long recognized this. Eugen versus Bowenbach described capital as a temporal extension of production. Hayek treated capital as a structure of intemporal coordination. Lockman emphasized its heterogeneity and its dependence on expectations. Put simply, capital is not just stuff. It is a materialized outcome of a cognitive shift. In this light of originality, capital is not the input that produces innovation. It is the output of innovation retrospectively measured. The law of diminishing returns. We should lay that out, starting with the classical edition from which nearly all growth theory descends. David Ricardo, writing in 1817, described diminishing returns to his land in principles of political economy and taxation. He showed how, as more labor and capital applied to fixed land, each additional unit produces less output. Though formulated in agriculture, the principle generalizes. Growth slows unless new productivity structures emerge. Karl Marx, writing half a century later in Das Kapital, identified a different trap. In his theory of the falling rate of profit, as machines replace labor, the source of surplus value diminishes, the system deepens capital without expanding value, eventually stagnates, becomes politically unstable. Without transformation, the system collapses into conflict over fixed value. Joseph Schumpeter, writing in the early 20th century, reframed both crises in the theory of economic development and capitalism, socialism, and democracy. He argued that growth is in fact not equilibrium, but rupture. Innovation, new combinations of production, new goods, new methods, breaks the cycle. It is not accumulation, but creative destruction that generates progress. Despite their differences, these three figures share one structural insight. Without innovation, the system converges towards zero-sum outcomes. So algorithmic systems and wealth collapse. The insight becomes mathematically explicit in the Solow-Swan growth model. Here, output is a function of capital and labor and total factor productivity. At y be the output just to its products at time t, at a be the total factor productivity, at L and t be capital and labor, but b be the share of the income. It represents the portion of GDP paid to capital, returns to capital as profits into percent. Symmetrically be the labor share of the income, and the growth equation is hoo-ha, okay. Robert Solow's 1956 model formalized growth in terms of capital, labor, and a third term, total factor productivity. Total factor productivity captures all residual growth not accounted by inputs. TFP is all that is not capital or labor, and over time the TFP turns out to be the dominant contributor. Empirical data shows that long-term growth in developed economies comes mostly from total factor productivity, not from capital deepening or population expansion, but Solow treated this as exogenous. The model cannot explain where total factor productivity comes from, it just assumes it happens. Without growth, the model flattens, that is, no growth. As capital deepens, diminishing returns ensure the capital yields less output over time. Without growth, and output eventually plateaus. And Paul Romer in 1990 extended the model, an endogenous technological change. He made endogenous. Innovation becomes a product of human intention, driven by ideas, not just inputs, but Romer's model still depends on one assumption that new ideas continue to appear. And here the relevance of artificial general intelligence becomes visible. If an AGI cannot perform frame innovation, then it cannot derive total functional productivity. It can only optimize inside the capital structure already given. In Solow's terms, it cannot lift the curve. In Romer's, it cannot regenerate the space of ideas. That means mathematically, artificial general intelligence systems lacking frame innovation will eventually hit a ceiling not by resource constraint but by structural limitation. From an economic perspective, this is not merely a philosophical problem. It implies a structural ceiling on computable intelligence. In simplified terms, where would wealth be today without frame innovation? The German example. Let's take all this into account and simply ask, what would economic life, wealth look like without these kinds of cognitive shifts? Are these shifts of high relevance? And we know the answer. Take Germany. Historical data from the Madison Project and the World Bank estimates that Germany's gross domestic product per capita in the year 1800 was around $800. In 2023, it exceeds $52,000. That is a factor of more than 65. The change cannot be explained by accumulation of labor or capital in the narrow sense as the result of scientific, technological, and conceptual revolutions. Electricity, chemistry, railways, semiconductors, modern medicine each create a new structure of action and production. None emerged within the existing system. Each required frame innovation, and frame innovation is exactly what artificial general intelligence cannot do if the infinite choice B proofs hold. I can't remember what B is, sorry. That means that a system that lacks this ability can scale, but only within the parameters of what already exists. It may optimize towards diminishing returns and may become efficient at managing the end of its own productivity, but it cannot regenerate itself. Some philosophy in between, relevance of non-computables and complex moral system and epistemic systems. Incompleteness, right at the center of decision. Let us now set aside the mathematics for a moment, thank you, and consider another domain where boundaries derived from infinite choice barrier emerge vividly. Moral judgment, mutual communication, or more broadly, any form of thinking that begins not with certainty but with doubt. Again, these domains of human decision making are not fringe topics, and they are anything but philosophical decor. Rather, they represent categories of problems that occur frequently and often critical, even pivotal. No reasonable observer would deny that such situations are deeply embedded in human life. And crucially, they turn out to be problems of the very kind that our formal proof isolates as structurally inaccessible to any closed formal system. Open systems, unstable games, double contingency. Human interaction is not governed by fixed utility, in many cases not governed by utility at all. Decisions unfold in environments that contain other agents of equal dynamic complexity, not merely as variables, but as observers, each of whom knows they are being observed. The condition is what sociological systems theory calls a double contingency. In his systemic theory, Niklas Luhmann defines contingency as a state of affairs that is neither a necessity nor an impossibility. In other words, something may be as it is, but it could also be entirely different. In a single contingency setting, an agent interacts with a less complex but often passive environment. Through action and reaction, they can reduce uncertainty and often stabilize the situation at a low complexity equilibrium. But double contingency is different. Here, two self-referential, dynamically complex agentic systems meet, each blind to the inner workings of the other. Each can only perceive the other as a black box. The difficulty, communicative interaction in this setting does not necessarily reduce uncertainty, and if it does not do so by confirming shared expectations. In fact, each system remains opaque to the internal expectations of the other. What emerges instead is structural coupling, a coordination of behavior based not on understanding, but on repeating patterns that become stable enough to support continued interaction. These patterns enable each system to behave as if it can respect responses, and this has nothing to do with shared meaning and functions simply because the structure in the form of communications contains the range of variable continuations. This means only structure, not understanding, reduces complexity. These structures become the very foundation of social systems, which, according to Luhmann, consists solely of communicative operations. So, communication can reduce uncertainty, but only by producing structural patterns that allow for prediction of future interactions, but not all communication works this way. In fact, communication can just as easily increase uncertainty by expanding meaning, opening interpretation, or undermining existing structure. Successful communication under double contingency is never guaranteed. It always involves a degree of risk, and sometimes it fails completely. Thus, the semantic trajectory of communication must be understood as dynamic and may converge towards structure or diverge towards instability, depending on how well the situation aligns with available structures and shared codes. Double contingency takes over whenever communication occurs in situations that point beyond those structures where clear rules, roles, or symbols are not yet in place. Again, these are not rare exceptions. Every structured pattern of communication began in such a fluid and non-computable state before crystallizing into a social form. So, communicative acts can either reduce or widen complexity. And in formal terms, semantic alpha. Oy vey. We can now express this using the concept of alpha as a proxy for semantic stability. Communication divergent, meaning extremely proliferated. Communication gets more or less compressible. Structure is more and more clear. Communication is compressible and structured. Thus, alpha becomes a formal proxy for semantic tractability. Double contingency fits squarely into the category of irreducibly infinite decision spaces, at least until a critical threshold is crossed where sufficient semantic and structural clarity emerges, allowing for probabilistic weighing of options and prediction of outcomes. This is not just theory, it's a formal pathway between sociological reality and statistical formalism, and a precise explanation of why artificial general intelligence as a closed system cannot operate meaningfully in open communicative domains where alpha declines rather than increases. Morality, a dilemma. Are decisions made by AGI morally acceptable? The very existence of that question reveals how oddly the discourse between some ethicists and technology providers has developed. If one tries to make a system have a trait called morality, the morality itself, nolens volens, needs to be treated as a situationally adaptive but still hierarchical system of imperatives of decision making. Moral decisions in that context are often described as optimizations around norms, values, and problem-solving necessities to find the good, avoid the harm, minimize regret, maximize well-being, and so on. In other words, it is an endeavor of moral computability. But such a paradigm necessarily breaks down under even only slight pressure. Morality is not a question of computing trade-offs within a well-defined decision space. Morality is not a question of so-called hypothetical imperatives towards some situative real-world typos, as Kant would say. When morality moves beyond algorithmic theory into lived reality, things may look very different. Genuine moral problems simply are of another kind. They are about choosing in the face of conflicting goods between incompatible obligations under ambiguous knowledge. It means choosing between impossibilities, between two different no-goes, between two different ways of becoming guilty. This is what one classes classical moral conflicts, and these don't occur only because of incomplete information. It is often structural. One cannot keep a promise and avoid harm. One cannot tell the truth and protect a friend. One cannot obey one value without violating another. Modeling such situations algorithmically requires to rank one value over the other. The system then resolves the dilemma in that way and produces moral failure with the best possible precision. Individuals, when trying to do the right and good thing, often do not resolve things like that. They just don't resolve it at all. They just can. Sometimes they shouldn't. They hesitate, wrestle, they carry the contradiction. They ultimately act anyway, knowing there is no clear choice in sight, and they will live with what follows. The burden is called responsibility. You need skin in that game in which you can fail and deeply suffer from it. And maybe, just maybe, while almost being crushed by all that weight, you find a way out one you would never have seen without being burdened. This is not weak in decision, it is acknowledgement of situational overcomplexity and, more importantly, of one's own and very often inevitable fallibility. This cannot be expressed as a solved utility function. It is not a problem with an answer. An algorithmic system cannot carry conflict, cannot remain inside ambiguity, will always choose according to some given weights. But sometimes the moral core of a situation is that one must not resolve it. One must bear it, sometimes knowing the wrong decision is around the corner. In fact, this state of mind is the basis of what later can become forgiveness and mercy. And morality without forgiveness can easily become tyranny, just as justice without mercy can culminate in mere cruelty. The structure of mercy. As a system built for optimization cannot meaningfully forgive, it can simulate the appearance of forgiveness by computing a certain share of forgiveness results according to given rules, but forgiveness is not at all a result. It is an interruption. It breaks the logic. It changes the rules of the response by saying, I could and should respond justifiably, but I choose not to. It is a collapse within the logic without being one out of reasoning. It is a judgment beyond, not against, calculation. It is irrational, for it is reasonable. This kind of thinking does not arise from constraint satisfaction, it arises from incompleteness, awareness, the knowledge that all structures are partial, all judgments are framed, all actions take place inside an unresolved world. This kind of judgment is not a process of subsumption, it is one of reflection. An AGI cannot forgive in this non-rule-based way. It cannot carry, let alone execute, a contradiction. It does not risk its own coherence, and it does not know the limits of its own position. Not a good constellation for an algorithm deciding over good and bad in potentially non-comparable situations, so trying to solve this by so-called alignment might be far more than tricky. Alignment of that kind, in fact, it faces the exact same boundaries as the algorithm itself. It is on the infinite choice brokenness, probability, I don't know. Barrier, thank you. An algorithmic system operating a moral policy includes its own incompleteness that truly holds it while deciding to go paradoxical. How could one ever imagine that being in an existing thing? Result: unconditional possibility and structural impossibility. It is well conceivable that, given advances in architecture, compute, and training, future AI systems will improve dramatically at solving complex optimization tasks. In situations where the problem is well defined, the outcome space is finite, and the framing is stable, such systems may reach or even exceed human-level performance. Through forms of weak emergence and with sufficiently sophisticated metacognitive coordination, cross-disciplinary problem-solving with a defined decision space may become technologically feasible. If sufficiently comprehensive or defined narrowly as the ability to operate across more than one technical domain under defined constraints, then AGI might, in that reduced sense, eventually become possible. However, this is not how it is conceived in the scientific literature, the public discourse, or the goals stated by leading AI labs. In all relevant domains, artificial general intelligence is defined as a system capable of solving human life problems across disciplines and, more importantly, across context. Problems that are not only complex but decisive, that carry real-world implications for life development and survival. In this prevailing definition, AGI must act where real decisions are made in rather ambiguous, structurally open situations. And in those domains, be they moral, strategic, innovative, or interpersonal, our proof shows that algorithmic systems, regardless of sophistication, face a structural barrier. These decisions are not unreachable due to engineering constraints, they are unreachable due to the nature of computation itself. Therefore, if we remain consistent with the current concept of AGI, one that includes generality and meaningful decision-making, then AGI remains a mathematical impossibility. This is not a matter of scale, of how much power, data, or depth we give a system. It is simply a matter of kind. These systems are, by their nature, defined by what they cannot decide. When in human terms, one is confronted with the need to take a real decision, not a derivable conclusion, algorithmic systems, by their very nature, are incapable of acting. Performance does not make any difference. It is a matter of operational principle, resulting in specifically bounded capability. The frequent human failure to make good decisions in these domains does not alter this. The people often choose poorly, does not imply that algorithms could choose better. They cannot choose at all. They cannot even generate a set of options. It only proves that real decisions are hard, but they are hard exactly because they are structurally open and not because they are poorly computed. bounded. And in these domains where there is no optimal path, no clear rule, or stable frame, algorithms cannot produce solutions. Finally, and assuming that doing some tricky communication maneuvers that magically define artificial general intelligence back into existence, one inevitably has to state AGI is an impossibility. The very nature of algorithmic systems sets a boundary it can simply not overcome, for the boundary is the algorithm. Alright, implications for research. If this analysis is correct, the implications are staggering. The current path is a dead end. No mass scaling, no architectural innovations, no training improvements will overcome the infinite choice barrier. We are not approaching artificial general intelligence, we're approaching the limits of what algorithms can do. This doesn't diminish the value of AI research. Algorithmic intelligence is tremendously powerful within its domain, but we should stop expecting it to become general in the sense of matching human cognitive abilities across all domains. But let's take a step backward and see the whole picture. Understanding intelligence, the Hilbert legacy in the AI industry. There is something we usually oversee, something profound in my view about how we've conceived of intelligence itself. Our very definition of intelligence is the child of mathematician David Hilbert. One could even state that the A and the I are somewhat separated twin children of his thinking and his program. So around 1900, Hilbert's dream every mathematical problem must be solvable for clear, strict proof. Truth equals provability. Everything can be formalized based on axioms. One uses operational rules of logic in order to get true theorems that by applying the same procedure can lead to corollaries, etc. 1905, the first IQ test, Binet and later Stanford-Binet, define intelligence, the ability to recognize patterns, predict the symbol that logically misses or must come next, apply inherent rules systematically, all in all, progress logically from premises to conclusions. In essence, intelligence that was finally called G, standing for general, is unknowingly or not defined as the ability to Hilbert-style reasoning. This ability G could objectively, was named IQ, could be objectively measured. 1931, Gödel, trying to set forth the Hilbert paradigm, found a method to code mathematical problems and found out that there are true theorems within a system that cannot be proved without the system breaking down. Incompleteness didn't hinder the success of this new procedure as the birth of what we nowadays call coding, back then Gödelizing. I'm starting to wonder if maybe he used AI to write this because of all the typos. Anyway, 1936, Turing set forth Gödel's coding work, Turing machine, etc., and discovered the halting problem. 1950s to the present, computer science, together with technology, progressed in huge leaps and bounds, and the 21st century is finally able to create AI. The intelligence is basically defined by referring to the concept of intelligence generally used in empirical psychology that is measured in IQ and still deeply rooted in Hilbert's paradigm. Therefore, it is not surprising that intelligence is translated into pattern recognition and prediction, statistical inference, rule-based deduction. The circle closes. We've defined intelligence in Hilbert's image, built machines to embody the definition, and now or soon wonder why they hit the Gödelian walls. The deep irony. Gödel destroyed Hilbert's dream of complete formalization. Turing showed the limits of computability, yet we still measure intelligence by Hilbertian standards, and we build AI on Hilbertian principles. And then we expect it to achieve what Gödel and Turing proved impossible. Let that sink in a bit. We have built a Hilbert machine that excels in doing Hilbert tasks while not taking into account that eventually leads to a Gödel result that puts the machine into a Turing loop. And that loop, as soon as one has to do a certain type of real-life decisions. Right here at the point where IQ, intelligence, and algorithmic systems meet, right in front of a wall made of pure logic, lies an opportunity. No, not a breakdown, a true opportunity to rethink what intelligence is, to grasp what computational systems can do, and what not, and to redefine the relationship. If my theorem is correct, a very important narrative will get into a rather hopeless situation, a narrative that people have bet quite substantial amounts on. And being an entrepreneur myself, I don't like the idea of courageous, innovative people that make formidable, groundbreaking products that I myself love using, failing because of a for sure compelling story that turns out to be a logical impossibility. And should any of said people ever read these lines, I hereby want to express there is a better narrative, one that would show tremendous growth potential, not only in terms of user metrics, but in terms of real cash flow. The other narrative is right here at the boundary. And read some Hayek and Taleb. This might help you getting a solution that is merely a technological challenge, not all too high, I guess, and that could therefore actually work both logically and commercially. So, the conclusion. Yay! Thank you for hanging in so long. We began with 3 seemingly impossible questions, which we discovered were impossible for the same reason. They require something beyond computation. Through mathematical proof, we've shown artificial general intelligence, defined as an algorithmic system capable of solving all problems humans can solve, as well as better, cannot exist. It's not that it won't exist, or it hasn't existed yet, but simply cannot. The infinite choice barrier is absolute as any theorem in mathematics. The surprising junction at the edge of machine and human. Upon reflecting on these results, a deeper horizon opens up. The boundary we have identified for machines is perhaps also the boundary of human understanding itself, precisely as Kant described it. The human mind, like any algorithmic system, organizes the world by means of categories: causality, substance, interaction, space, time, quality, relation, modality. These categories make experience possible, transforming the raw material of the senses into an articulated, finite, intelligible world, the world of appearances. The understanding is that the faculty that orders and limits what is given by the senses, bringing into clear categories. Categories and layers concepts are for Kant the a priori organizing principles that provide structure, coherence, and meaning to what we perceive. Without them, there would be no experience, no knowledge, no world as we know it. In short, what is organized and structured by human ratio is precisely what we call reality. But what happens when we encounter situations that defy all categories and rules, problems for which there is no given structure, no pattern, no algorithm? What if, in such cases, things cannot be meaningfully divided, structured, or abstracted? What if the sheer manifold of what is sense is absolutely impossible to ignore? Infinite choice. Yes, perhaps so, the infinite choice barrier, but what does the human being do with it? Whatever it is, a human can, quite obviously, still decide or even come to an insight. Einstein did it, Copernicus did it, and even a husband may survive the infamous weight question with his merit intact. But was this a previously unrecognizable insight or decision even part of reality before it was made? Was it prior to its genesis at least possible, conceivable appearance? Kant would likely say no. How could it be if it could not be subsumed under the categories? When humans are confronted with the unsubsumable, they are somehow neither forced to halt nor do they inescapably keep on rationalizing. They often, in some mysterious way, just see, decide, and act. But this decision cannot arise from rational categories of understanding. This must point to something else. But to what? To the thing in itself, Ding an sich, which according to Kant is what the human truly is. To the ground of freedom he identifies as the essence of humanity. To the aesthetic, the domain of creativity, where the free play of understanding and imagination outwits categories and concepts. Are we at the boundary between human and machine, by chance standing at Kantian crossroads, a roundabout, where the three critiques of the roads of understanding, reason, and judgment meet? In any case, perhaps while standing at these boundaries of artificial intelligence, there is much to learn about ourselves. This paper isn't an epitaph for AGI, it's at least should be a birth announcement for what comes next. And perhaps that's the most human insight of all. Our greatest breakthroughs don't come from solving the impossible, they come from understanding why it's impossible and finding a very different way forward. The barrier is the beginning.